Jaishankar ji is a Shishya of Pujya Swami Dayananda ji and has undergone a 3-year residential Vedanta course with Pujya Swami ji at Ashra Vidya Gurukulam in Anakati from 1995 to 1998. He is an alumnus of IIT Varanasi. Jaishankar ji graduated as an engineer and was working in India and later USA as a software engineer. He met his guru Pujya Swami Dayananda ji first at Ashra Vidya Gurukulam in Sailorsburg and then decided to study Vedanta with Pujya Swami ji. After completing the 3-year residential course at AVG, Jaishankar ji married Sri Vidya ji, who was also a student of the same course as per Pujya Swami ji's wishes. Jaishankar ji settled in Chennai after the course and was teaching Vedanta and Sanskritam to interested people in Chennai. Jaishankar ji and Sri Vidya ji were doing Aim for Seva work near Chennai under the banner of Aim for Seva as per the wishes of their guru. In 2004, Pujya Swamiji asked Jaishankar ji to take over the administration of Aim for Seva full time. In the meantime, the tsunami struck, and from that day, Jaishankar ji and Sri Vidya ji started working full time for the tsunami relief and rehabilitation under Aim for Seva. Jaishankar ji also worked as the joint secretary of Aim for Seva for nearly 3 years and was responsible for expanding the main program. Pujya Swamiji asked Jaishankar ji and his Guru Bhai Kalyan Kumar to buy some land in a rural area and build a Gurukulam around 2010. As a tribute to his Guru, Jaishankar ji along with Kalyan Kumar and Sri Vidya ji is now building Arsha Vidya Varshini Gurukulam at Dakshinamurti Sarovar. The plan is to build a Gurukulam with rooms, lecture hall, kitchen and dining facilities for 50 people to stay and study. At present, there is a temple for the Vallabha Mahaganapati, Sharadamba and Adi Shankaracharya and a Goshala for the protection of Desi cows with 25 cows. Jaishankar ji plans to teach Vedanta and Sanskrit primarily for adults, but also to have yoga camps, children's camps, and youth camps in the future. As of now, he is conducting online classes on Vedanta, Sanskritam, and chanting. So this was based on Jaishankar ji's official submission of his bio. But I also have the pleasure of knowing Jaishankar ji personally for the last several years over social media, along with his wife Sri Vidya ji. And I can definitely say that not only are they an exemplar for teachers of Vedanta, but also fantastic role models for the purpose of Dharma. And this is something that was very close to Pujya Swamiji's heart as well. Additionally, Jaishankar ji used to be quite a bit involved in the rock scene in the 1980s. So that's an interesting tidbit over there. 1990s, sorry. So Jaishankar ji, I will hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Prashant, for that warm introduction, I would say. Okay, so let us start with a prayer and then let me get into the subject matter straight away. Om Sada Shiva Samarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. So today the topic is understanding cause and effect in the light of Shankara's Ghata Bhashya. So many of you may not know what is Ghata Bhashya itself, even those who may have been Vedanta students. It is a part of the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad Bhashya. In the beginning of Brihadaranyaka itself, in the first chapter, second Brahmana, the first Vakya starts like this: Naiva iha kinchana agre asit, mrityuna eva idam avritam asit. Like that it starts and some more is there. But this is the relevant portion. And Shankara starts the Bhashya here and takes this as an opportunity to discuss cause and effect itself in general with the example of a pot. So this portion of the Bhashya is called Ghata Bhashya. Shankara himself does not call it as Ghata Bhashya, but later on it became popular as Ghata Bhashya, primarily because the cause and effect is discussed in detail here with a pot and clay as the cause of the pot. Pot as the effect and clay as the cause. So here the cause effect, if you look at it in general, there are many views of many different darshanas. Okay. The Buddhists who are Shunyavadis, all of them are in one form or the other Shunyavadis only, say that there is no cause at all, in fact. So they are called Asat Karanavadi. Karana itself they don't accept really, because if you take even the, there are Madhyamikas who are called Shunyavadis really among the Buddhists. But there are also Yogachara Buddhists are there. They both actually do not even accept an external world. And the Yogachara Buddhist actually features in this discussion prominently, is the one who considers that everything is kshanika or momentary. The entire perception of the world along with the subject also is momentary. That means there is no connection between one moment, one momentary cognition and the other momentary cognition for them. So that is their view. So according to that, there cannot be any cause or effect, because their view is that you first see a lump of clay, that is one moment of cognition, and then somehow you are seeing in the next moment or whatever, after a few moments you are seeing a pot, that is another moment of cognition. So there is a clay lump, there is a clay pot. In reality, everything is in between also only momentary cognitions. There is no real connection, or there is no cause which can be connected to a effect. So that is their what do you say, conclusion. Now that he takes up first actually, that is because even the Shruti also gives a avakasha for that, I think, because Shruti says mischievously, I think, naiva iha kinchana agre asit. It starts like that. That means in the beginning there was nothing here. Okay. But immediately the Shruti says it was all covered by mrityu or death. Here mrityu actually means Hiranyagarbha, because this portion is about Hiranyagarbha upasana, and mrityu is the name given to Hiranyagarbha also. There is a reason for that and all that. Those things we don't have to discuss now. So the Buddhist now comes forward and says, even your Shruti is saying there was nothing in the beginning. So it supports my contention that there is no cause at all. So for this, immediately there are other people, Nayayikas and most other Dvaitins, they are all called Asat Karyavad. They say that the Karana is there before any creation, but the effect is not there. A non-existent effect comes into being during the production of something, and for that many causes come together. So they talk about many different types of causes. There is a material cause, there is an intelligent cause, there are other Sahakari Karana and all that they talk about. There are different terminologies also are there here. The Nayayikas talk about Samavayi Karana, Asamavayi Karana and all that. So, but those things are irrelevant for our discussion. Broadly, what we understand is there are one group of people who deny the cause itself, that there was ever a cause which is becoming an effect and all that. It's all only similarity for them. Okay, the other group says that we agree that there is a cause before the effect came, but the effect was not there before. So the effect is newly produced and it comes into being. So amongst this, the first group who deny the cause, they are now quoting the Shruti saying, Naiva iha kinchana agre asit. There was nothing there in the beginning, like this your Shruti is saying. So what I am saying is correct. There is no cause at all, in fact. For this, again, one counter argument, the Nayayikas themselves come in that bhashya and they say that no, we see that there is a clay before the pot is produced. But for this, the Buddhist is answering that you can say that there is a clay for a pot here. But what about the entire world if you consider? Who has seen anything before the world came into being? If you cannot see anything before the world has come into being, that means there was nothing only. Okay, so if you cannot cognize anything, what was there before the world came into being, then you have to actually conclude that there was nothing unless you can prove really there was something there before. So like this, they are giving an argument that there was Shunya before and then everything came from there. And again, everything is going back to Shunya. That is their largely their conclusion. Now for this, Shankara then immediately gives an answer that, see, since you are quoting the Shruti, Shruti also immediately says, Mrityuna eva idam avritam asit. It was all covered by death. So if death is covering, or if we talk about covering in general, then what is covering something else, correct? There are two objects are there. There is a covered object, there is a covering object. So here that means two things have to be talked about in terms of covering. So for this, Shankara then finally answers that the Karana covers the Karya. The Karana covers the Karya. That is what Mrityuna eva idam avritam. Idam, whatever right now we see as Nama Rupam Vyaktam Jagat, the world which is manifest in the variegated names and forms, whatever we see now, in the beginning it was covered by its cause, which is then in the form of unmanifest. Okay. So that means what Shankara is saying is both Karana and Karya exist always. That is our view. So that is the Siddhanta view. That is not only Shankara's view, it is the view of the Shruti itself. So Shankara is now quoting the Shruti and saying that the Siddhanta is that both cause and effect always exist. They always exist, but only thing is when the effect is unmanifest, it does not appear for cognition. You cannot cognize it as a manifest effect, but it is still there potentially. So this is the Siddhanta. So everything potentially exists in the cause, but which effect is manifest at any one point in time may vary, because of which some other effects you may not be able to cognize. So this is the Siddhanta. Now here the Buddhist, once this is said, Buddhist comes and says, no, we do not accept what you say. There is no cause which actually continues into the effect. In fact, even in regular worldly transactions, whatever we see, the clay in the form of lump has to be destroyed to produce the clay in the form of pot. Therefore, your cause is actually destroyed and then only the effect is coming. So how can you say that a cause is actually continuing into the effect? Because we say that we see a clay in the form of lump, clay is visible, and the same clay is again visible to us. We are able to cognize it. So we are saying this clay in the form of lump only has, or that clay we have to say, that clay in the form of the lump has only become this pot, which is also a clay, correct? The same clay is there in the pot which was there before in the lump. So this is our perception. But the Buddhist denies that. He's saying, he's now trying to actually conflate the argument by saying that the clay in the form of lump got destroyed, and then only the clay in the form of pot we are cognizing. So the Karana is destroyed. For this, Shankara is pointing out now that he says, no, the form itself is not a Karana really. Only the substance is the cause. So clay as a substance existed before, and the clay as a substance exists even when there is the pot, and clay as a substance will exist even when the pot is destroyed. So that substance alone which continues to be perceived, cognized, is the cause, not a particular form like lump or powder and all these things. So the form is not really the cause. Once we say this, the Buddhist now denies even this continuity. He has to deny that because they are Kshanika Vijnanavadin. I told that before also. So they are saying, they are now advancing an argument saying that no, that clay which was in the form of lump looks now similar to the pot which is now again in the form of clay, correct? There is a similarity only. Really, there is no continuity of cause. Now they are in a trap because similarity means there is pratyabhijna, there is recognition has to be there. There are two cognitions, and you have to have both the cognitions in one witness at least to cognize the similarity between them. So for recognition to happen, I must have first cognized one thing, and again I have to cognize again the same thing, and then say that this is that, so am like that, this is that in the form of this only. The recognition happens always. And similarity means it is really recognition, really, correct? We are recognizing that something is similar to something else. So Shankaracharya then points out that if you talk about similarity, in your system only there cannot be any possibility of any similarity, because you don't even have a continuous cognizer or a witness. Everything is momentary for you. So how can you say that there is similarity? Then finally the Buddhist says, no, it's only a notion of similarity. Similarity also need not be based on any reality, real cognition of this and that. In this moment it appears similar to you, that's all. Then so Shankara then points out, if you say like that, that your whole conclusion is based on not any concrete object or basis, but it's only then this only becomes your fancy, correct? Then anybody can say anything, and there cannot be any way of determining what is actually the truth. So because at this point the Buddhist says that no, let everything, all are only notions. Let everything need not be based on any actual perception or cognition and all that. So finally Shankara says that even this, your notion that everything is a notion itself, will be negated by that very statement. So he applies his statement to his conclusion and negates that, saying that if we go in this route, then we cannot conclusively prove anything or conclusively determine what is the truth. So this is not the way to analyze. So in this way, first Shankara establishes that there has to be a cause, because we recognize the same cause previously in the form of one effect and later in the form of another effect. The cause is actually perceived. Now in this discussion, one more interesting point also Shankara makes. I thought maybe I will just give you a gist of that also. What is that is, so the Buddhist is actually making an inference, fancy inference they are making, that the world is momentary. For supporting that, they are doing a lot of inference. So at that point, Shankara points out that you cannot make an inference which goes against pratyaksha, against perception. Perception is the basis for inference, in fact, and an inference cannot be made to negate the perception itself. Two inferences can be contradictory to each other. In fact, there is even a technical term for that in Sanskrit. Okay, so, but in two inferences, sometimes they may be based on different assumptions to start with, and they can even, that two inferences can be made within keeping in view one's own initial assumptions, and you may even arrive at contradictory positions. But since both inferences are not strong enough to negate the other, both of them can be considered, okay, within their own system, that it is still consistent. But an inference cannot be made which contradicts against perception. That is an important point. Okay, so virodha avyabhicharita, like that, there is a virodha avyabhicharita can be there between two inferences, anumana, but it cannot be there between pratyaksha and anumana. So pratyaksha is bhalavat. Pratyaksha is stronger any day. You cannot make your own fancy inferences to actually go against what is actually observed. Even Shabda cannot negate pratyaksha. That also Shankara mentions in another context. So now in this way, the cause is there, that is established. So the asat karanavada is negated first. Then Shankara says, gives many reasons to say why the karya also already exists. So the asat karyavadis now come and argue with Shankara. So the first reason Shankara gives is that abhivyakti lingatvad, he says, means the very fact that the effect manifests itself indicates that it was already there, because only an existing thing can manifest itself. A non-existing thing cannot be manifest. So for this he gives an analogy. He says that, let us say there is a pot which is covered by darkness or even covered by a wall. So in this case, you cannot perceive the pot. So the pot is unmanifest, although it exists. It cannot be perceived. It doesn't come into the range of your perception. But that does not mean that it is non-existent, because if you remove the obstructions, the coverings, the avarana, then you can perceive it. So if a non-existent pot you talk about, then even if you shine the light in the darkness, a non-existent pot will not come into cognition. Only an existent pot, if it is covered by darkness, can be brought into cognition or manifestation. So the very fact that the effect comes into the range of your perception and manifests itself proves that it is already there. And in fact, he makes a note here that even the regular language verbs like creating, destroying, or even creation, destruction itself is all really only manifestation and unmanifestation. So it's all based on manifestation and unmanifestation. Creation, destruction and all in language we may use, but really it is only manifestation. It is based on manifestation and unmanifest, or differentiation and being undifferentiated. These are the really what is there, and these other words really mean only this. So this point one Shankara makes, the Nayayika now says that no, you say that the effect always exists in the cause. If that is the case, let us say initially there is obstruction. Darkness is there, so you are not seeing the effect. But once the light shines, once the sun comes out, let us say, and the light is there, all the effects have to be seen in the cause, because you are saying now that all effects are already there in the cause. Now for the Shankara says, no, there are two types of obstruction. One type of obstruction is what I initially gave you in the analogy, that it's like a darkness or a wall. But there is another type of obstruction or avarana, which is that one effect of a karana itself becomes the avarana of the other effects. So what Shankara says is a cause is always manifesting as only one effect. So for that effect to manifest itself, it has to manifest by covering all other effects or potential effects of the cause. Because a cause, like a clay, can become a pot, it can become something else also, correct? It can become a lump, it can become a powder, it can become even a plate, it can become many things. So that means essentially a pot, a clay pot, has to manifest itself by covering clay as lump or clay as powder or clay as a plate, etc. So one effect itself becomes the avarana for all other effects, potential effects of the cause. So there are two types of avaranas or covering. Like this, when Shankara answers, again the Nayayika is now raising a point. He says, no, how can you say that one effect can cover the other ones? He raises a point of space here. He says a covering should be separate from what is covered. Then only it can really cover. Both the covering and the covered cannot be in the same place and then one covers the other. How can you say like that? So this argument he raises. So even for this, Shankara gives a very intelligent answer. So I really enjoyed this answer. So he says, even what you say, this is not a rule. Why? Because you put milk and water together. They both are there in the same place, but the milk is covering the water. So your argument that they cannot be in the same place and one cannot cover the other is not true. It can be there like that. So then once this is said, the Nayayika is now changing track. Okay, so he now says, so according to you, one effect comes or manifests itself by obstructing other effects or the manifestation of other effects. That means essentially you are saying that to produce any effect, the effort has to be directed only at actually stopping or obstructing other effects. But in reality, we do not see like that. A potter does not set about to make the pot thinking that he is obstructing the clay in the form of lump or anything. He produces the pot from the clay. So your argument that one effect comes about by obstructing other effects, potential effects, doesn't seem to be proper, because the Vyavahara is not like that. In the transactional world, nobody sets about to create something thinking that they are going to obstruct all other effects of that particular cause. So for this, Shankara says, even what you say is not really a hard and fast rule. See, even when we remove the obstruction, we are not only making an effort to remove the obstruction, but we are also creating something. He says, like, even to remove the darkness, you have to light a lamp. Okay, so you are making an effort to light the lamp. In the process, you remove the darkness and the existing pot manifests itself, let us say. So here you are actually making the effort to light the lamp, not just to only remove the darkness, like the Shankara points out. For that also, the Nayayika says, even lighting the lamp is really only removing the darkness. But now Shankara says that's not true, because the light actually covers the object and makes you see the object. It's not only just removing the darkness, but light itself is there, positively covering the object. And because of that, only the perception is possible. So the effort made is for both. Finally, he concludes that essentially we have to make an effort such that the effect comes out. That can be for both obstructing the other effects and also to bring about the actual effect. So there is no problem in terms of making the effort. So after having established this, so now Shankara is also trying to give other reasons. Okay. So what are the other reasons which Shankara is giving? So Shankara says, even our cognition of past and future, the way we cognize that, also proves the potential existence of any object always. So when we say that the pot will exist in future, okay, in fact, a potter starts his work with the express intention to produce a pot. So whatever if he does, whatever action he is going to do, this action will definitely result in a pot. Without that knowledge, nobody will even make any effort to produce anything. That means that whatever pot is going to manifest in future is already potentially there now. Then only you will make even any effort to produce it or manifest it. That's what Shankara is arguing very intelligently. So he says, nobody will make any effort to produce Vandhyaputra. Correct? So a totally non-existent thing will not be a reason for anybody to even make any effort to produce it. The very fact that the potter knows that by doing such and such thing, I will be able to manifest this pot, that he should know already certainly. As a certainty, you have to know that. Then only you will even make any effort to produce. So that means, even though you say, I am making a pot, in fact, even in language, many times we use it like present only. So actually, I am making the pot. The future pot is referred to even in the present, even in language. That is because it is potentially existent. Without the pot being potentially existent, even the way we actually talk about a future pot or even a past pot will not be possible. So this is one argument Shankara gives. In fact, at this place, Shankara gives another very interesting argument also. He says that if you negate the potential existence, the future existence of the pot, the Trikala jnana of a yogi. Yogis can have Trikala Jnanam, he says, and he gives that as a, and also for Ishvara. So he gives that as an argument here. He says the Trikala Jnanam, past, present, and future knowledge which some yogis and Ishvara have will become false if you say that the pot does not potentially exist. Now, the future pot has to potentially exist. Only then the future knowledge of the yogi and Ishvara will be based on reality. Otherwise, it will become false. So, again, all this prayoga, language prayoga is figurative. Like that also, you cannot argue. This point note also Shankara makes there. So, this is one argument he makes, that the future part has to be potentially there now, then only any effort you make towards that will be meaningful. Otherwise, nobody will even make any effort. Then he gives another argument saying Vipratishedhat cha Vipratishedha. Means otherwise, even if you say while the potter is making the pot with the idea that I am producing the pot, at the same time, if you say the pot does not exist, the future pot does not exist means it will not exist really, correct? You are actually contradicting that the pot can come into very existence itself will be contradicted. So while the potter is potentially making the pot, at the same time, if you are saying that the pot does not exist, you are in the same sentence making that two statements which are contradictory to each other. So it exists and it does not exist. Both cannot be there at the same time. It is contradictory. So we have to say that the potential pot exists right now, and that only then manifests itself in future. So having given all these arguments, Shankara then gives, he concedes to the Asatkaryavad. He says that, okay, this much we both can agree. What is that? The pot is not there in the past, or while the potter is making the pot, it is not there in the same form. Okay. So there is a functional reality of the pot. The potential pot cannot be used to fetch water, correct? Only the manifest pot has functional reality. But that does not mean that when it is unmanifest, it is not there, really. So that is the point now. Shankara concedes that we can say that the pot as a manifest form is not there while the potter is making it, or while before whatever it came into existence. Like even how the potter is existent, correct? An existent potter only is making a pot. In the same way, the pot itself is not there as a manifest reality, but it is potentially there. That everybody has to accept, because only if it is potentially there, it can be brought into manifestation. So this much Shankara concedes. Then, so with this, almost all the arguments for existence of both the Karana and Karya are given. But then Shankara makes one more interesting point. He says he now brings into discussion the four types of abhava. So the Nayayika, they talk about, and even others, Mimamsakas and all, they talk about in general four abhavas. So the Nayayika says pragabhava. In fact, the Nayayika even defines the karya as pragabhava pratiyogi, the one which is opposed to its own prior non-existence. So pragabhava means prior non-existence, the absence of something before it is produced. So the pragabhava or prior non-existence is defined as something which is beginningless but comes to an end once the pot is produced or the effect is produced. Then there is a pradvamsa bhava. Dvamsa bhava or pradvamsa bhava means posterior non-existence, means after the effect is destroyed, it will not be there. And again, that is defined as something which has a beginning, but it is endless because the same pot can never come back. That is the idea. So there is a pragabhava, which is prior non-existence. There is a pradhamsa bhava, which is posterior non-existence, we can say. Then they also talk about something called atyanta bhava, or absolute non-existence. Of course, some people give the unholy compounds as absolute non-existence, like barren woman's son or the horn of a rabbit and all that. But Nayayikas are more practical people. So they don't actually give that as an example. So they say that some associations never happen or can never be there in all three periods of time. For example, the wind can never have color. That means the color abhava in wind never starts, never ends. It's absolute. It is atyanta bhava. Okay. So the rupa in the vayu, like this, they give other examples also. It is based on, they say that in all the three times there is no samsarga possible. There is no connection or association possible between two things, like that many are there. That is what is called atyanta bhava. Then there is also difference. Itara itara abhava or anyonya abhava. That means the pot, when you see the pot, there is no cloth in the pot. And when you see the cloth, there is no pot in the cloth. So it's a difference. Means difference is nothing but a negation of identity. That's how the Nayayikas look at it. So tadatmya nishedha. Okay. So identities are negated when we see difference. But this anyonya bhava or difference is actually in the form of something else. It's a positive. This even Nayayikas accept. Most people accept that this anyonya bhava is actually in the form of a bhava padartha, some other thing which exists. So if you say the anyonya bhava of pot in cloth actually exists as cloth. The anyonya bhava of cloth in pot actually exists as pot, which is an existent entity. So now Bhashyakara says, if you now accept this anyonya bhava as a bhava padartha, you can also accept all other abhavas also as bhava only. He makes this point actually. So he says that the even pragabhava also is only with reference to a potential pot which actually exists. It doesn't exist in the same form, but it exists potentially. So pragabhava also points to a bhava padartha in the form of a potential pot or unmanifest pot. Pradhamsa bhava also similarly points to a potential pot only. And atyanta bhava also, when you talk about samsarga association, it has to be only between two things, correct, always, which are existent. So the two potential things or two things are there, but they may not be there together or one in the other and all that, which is fine. So all abhavas in fact are only bhava padartha, like this Bhashyakara argues. So from all these things, what do we understand is that Shankara is the ultimate realist. Because people actually make a charge that Shankara is Mayavadi. In fact, Shankara is not interested in establishing Maya. Shankara is interested in establishing the Sadvastu, in fact. The Upanishads are also only teaching Brahman. Brahman is Atma. That is what is the intention, that is the teaching. Maya is only an explanatory device. And that also is not Shankara's own creation or anything. Even Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavan talks about Maya. There are Upanishad Vakyas about Maya. So like this, we are not really, in fact, every scientist can easily understand Maya. Because if you go to a fundamentally particle level, 99% is space actually. Then how are we seeing all this variegated world of solid, liquid, gas, plasma, this, that, everything, when everything 99% is space? See, that is all Maya only. Everybody can easily understand Maya. But what Shankara is interested is to establish Brahman. Shankara wants to teach the reality. He is the ultimate realist and he teaches Brahman as Atma. So this Karana ultimately is not separate from yourself. Because the Karana is presented as Satyam Jnanam Anantam. Jnanam means there is only one consciousness. And this consciousness is always available as I. The I in every individual is really this Satyam Jnanam Anandam Brahma only. That is the Atma Ekatva Vijnanam, which is the vision of the Upanishads, which Shankara also is actually teaching. So this is what Shankara teaches. So you cannot say Shankara is actually Mayavadi as a criticism. Also, I would like to say that in this context, there is some people say that truth is a pathless land and all that. Even that, I think they didn't have a proper guru and they do not know how to be a guru or teach. Because truth is easily definable as that which never changes. Okay, Shankara defines it even in the context of Sadeva Somya Idamagre Asit, even in Taittiriya Upanishad when he discusses Satyam, and even in Bhagavad Gita also when Nasato Vidyate Bhavaha, Nabhavo Vidyate Sataha, like that, when this verse is discussed, truth is something which cannot be negated in all three periods of time. Truth is something, once you ascertain it as this, never changes. It can never be negated in all three periods of time. That is the truth. And this definition cannot be broken by anybody. But somebody can come and say, no, true, you can give a definition like this, but is there anything like this? How can you teach this truth? Means we have a methodology to teach the truth also. Because the only thing which can never be negated is the negator. The negator Swarupa can never be negated. For us, there is no absolute non-existence anywhere. Understand that. That is why in Indian languages, there is no zero. The zero is called Pujya. Although there is a word Shunya, Pujya means it is worshipful. Because if you remove all the names and forms, what remains is Brahman alone. Because there has to be a cognizer to even cognize the vacuum. There can be a physical vacuum, but there is no real vacuum because there has to be a cognizer of even the vacuum. That cognizer can never be negated. For every cognition, the cognizer will be there. The negator can never be negated. That is our view. And that negator Swarupa can be taught to you also. There is a methodology to teach. And Shankara is one of the Sampradaya with. Okay, he knows this teaching methodology. He has taught it. And as a teacher, then his parampara is still flourishing. There is an unbroken lineage of teacher and taught. And so this is something we have to understand. One more final point here is some people now even have a fashion of claiming that only Gaudapada, Shankara and Sureshwara really taught proper Advaita. All other acharyas afterwards did not know anything. They distorted it by saying that Ajnana is a bhava padartha. Really, Ajnana is avidya abhava. They say. Okay, Jnana abhava is avidya. But abhava cannot produce anything. Abhava cannot be the basis for even any superimposition. In fact, that can be even proved here very clearly that Shankara is even talking all forms of abhava really have to be taken as bhava padartha only. So even if you say jnana abhava, there is nothing wrong in taking the jnana abhava as pointing to a bhava padartha, which is ajnana, which comes to an end, but with jnanam. So this is the traditional teaching. There is nothing wrong in this. This methodology works and it has worked. We cannot say that in between everybody is wrong or nobody knew, then there won't be any live Guru Shishya Parampara itself. You cannot negate that. One can have a view, but it cannot be this extreme, I think. So with this, I hope I have presented the subject matter in a way which is accessible to general people. I just wanted to give a taste of how the Shankara Bhashya is, what kind of arguments are there, and actually what is being established as the Siddhanta, which is what the Upanishad is really revealing. So with this, I will conclude this particular talk. Om.
Hari Om. Namaste, Jaishankarji. This was such a beautifully unfolded topic and not a very easy topic to understand, but you did it full justice and you made it palatable to all of us. So thank you so much. We may have time for just one question or two questions. Perhaps if you could just answer them quickly in the next 2 minutes, since we have to move to the next session. The first question is, can you explain the concept of puja, which is zero in the Indian tradition? And another question is, since there are so many different sampradayas, you have Ashavidya, Ramakrishna Mission, Chinmay Mission, so on and so forth. How come we don't see the unity between the Advaitins of all these sampradayas?
Yeah, puja, as I told you, puja is nothing but you are taking away all the names and forms. So even the concept of vibhuti also is the same. The jnana chakshuhu, the eye of wisdom, when it opens, it burns away all the names and forms, but it leaves behind only the vastu, which is the truth. And that is always worshipful, auspicious, like that. So that's why we call it as puja. Both the infinite and infinitesimal, both are puja for us. Okay. The other point is you are saying there is no unity between different Advaita Sampradayas. It will be there will be some differences in the way we teach and all that. We all agree about the vision. There is no doubt about that. Advaita as a vision, but how the Advaita has to be taught or what sadhanas have to be actually emphasized, these things may vary. So whoever has a ruchi for a particular tradition should follow that. I think that's all. We cannot argue more than that.
Prashant, can you please unmute yourself?
Yes, sorry. So there are a few more questions, but since we've sort of spilled into the next session, we can close here. And once again, thank you so much, Jai Shankar ji, for this fantastic talk.